Smile in my shoes, listen to my blues. I stand before you, resilient, stronger than power, soft as a flower. I know the hour, I am the times. It's the strength for me, it's the strength, it's the legacy.
Hi, I'm Marita Golden, author of The New Black Woman, and I'm tuning in to She Wrote the Book.
Well, it gives me pleasure, honor, and joy to introduce the newest member of the Unerased Black Women Speak team, and it is Tracy Giles McGee. Hi, Tracy.
Hello, I'm so happy.
And I am happy that you are basically leading the pack for She Wrote the Book.
Yes, and when you and I started discussing this, I was like, Unerased Black Women Speak is a whole movement, and I want to be part of it. And you really tapped into my love of writers, authors, the publishing industry, Black women raising their voices. This is all me. This is passion right here.
And we're going to get a little bit of all of you every other month when we do the She Wrote the Book Unerased recorded live. But before I turn the microphone and the stage over to you, I want everyone to see this.
My baby.
All right. This is a fabulous novel. In addition to being a creative, an artist, an activist, an events manager, Tracy McGee is also an author. And she has written her debut novel, Melting the Blues, is a lyrical story that takes us to her home state of Arkansas, and we live her experience through this just wonderful literary journey. And I want to ask everyone, order Melting the Blues. So I want to welcome you, Tracy, and thank you for joining us.
And thank you for having me. I am so excited. I'm very excited.
And have a great show. So with that, I hand the stage over to you.
Got it. Thank you so much, Gwen. Welcome to She Wrote the Book, where every story we showcase, every voice we amplify is a testament to the brilliance, creativity, and resilience of Black women. My name is Tracy Giles McGee, and I'm your host. In today's show, we're going to talk to several phenomenal authors who will discuss the ways in which their works echo today's era. Also, we're going to direct you to a list of banned books that everyone should be reading, buying, and supporting for obvious reasons. We will not be erased. Then we're going to bring you an interview with Athena Dixon, whose new book, The Loneliness Files, is getting a lot of buzz. So we're very excited to sit down with Athena. But we're also going to want you to stick around for Books Galore. And Books Galore, we're going to pay tribute, celebrate several phenomenal authors from our Primetime 55 Plus community. So definitely stay around for that. And without further delay, I invite you to listen, love, and be lifted.
My latest book is called Charisma's Turn, and it calls into, I think, our collective consciousness, this invitation for us to invest in girls and to think about girls in a way that allows for us to prioritize purpose over punishment. So when girls get in trouble in school, where do they go? Who do they have in their corner? And so this book is really a story about a girl who is able to tap into her power because of the adults that tap into her, and that allow for her to recover in a way that builds community rather than one that takes her away from her community by the use of harsh punishment in schools.
So one thing that I'm hoping that readers will get from my latest book, which is Perfect Black. I was so honored that Perfect Black received an NAACP Image Award. And I think one of the reasons why it did receive the award, and one of the things that it does is it talks about a rural sensibility. I talk a lot in that book about my own girlhood. So growing up Black in the rural South, growing up fat Black in country is one of the things that I focus on in that book. And even though I grew up in the 70s and 80s, it's still something that we are still dealing with, the Black female body and our images and our image as young women, and coming to our own to celebrate and be proud of our bodies is one of the things that I focus on in that book, and just what it means to go from girlhood to womanhood and all the things that were involved in it.
Well, I want, especially younger people, I want them to understand the world has not always been like this. The world was very different at a different time. And sometimes you have to think, African Americans, we're so used to this voice of silence, right? We don't want to talk about the past. And then these students come to college and they hear these stories in Black history and African American literature, and then they just go, how come I didn't know this? And one day I decided, what can you do? And I decided, well, think about who you know. And some of the short pieces I had written already. And I started talking to people. And every time I would talk to somebody about what I hoped my project would be, they would tell me about someone whom they knew, right? Like my friend Dolores Pringle. She said, you need to talk to John Canty. He worked for 5 presidents and he's still alive. I have a quote somewhere that I put in the first book. I said, our dignity is somewhere between claiming and embracing history.
Oh, I'm so excited about Charisma's Turn because it preserves culture in a lot of different ways. One is the character, Charisma, the central character. She discovers that she's able to tap into her power through the literature, through Black feminist literature. And so the teacher who comes in, or the counselor who comes in to work with her once she's in trouble in school, introduces her to this fantastic world that many of us already know, that really engages us in the power of literature. And, literature in and of itself is a preservation of culture. It's a preservation of language, a preservation of thought. And so by introducing through this character the power of that kind of transformative nature of Black feminist literature, I think I'm doing something to preserve the culture. And so I'm really excited about all the different ways that I try to capture our culture, but also frame our culture in a way that it is a testament to the power that resides in our communities, rather than thinking about girls who get in trouble from a deficit model.
Well, I think, especially in Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, I think that is a book that contributes to the preserving of the culture, because it begins in 1795 and talks about how women were empowered by the work that they did in the kitchen. We often think of enslaved women as working for the slaveholders, but I think what we also did is found a way to lift up our families and lift up the other people who were working around us through food and making a way out of no way. So I think that preservation of our culture continues. And it's something that our women were doing in 1795 and even before then on up till today.
And I was talking to a new friend, and he said, I never would have known who Ann Colo was. He said, and I said, yeah, she was during her time, she was just as famous as Christian Dior. But our people get lost in the shuffle of history. You know, we get whitewashed out of history. So I hope that more people, my stories are very simple stories that I tell in the book. I hope other people will learn to value their stories, their parents' stories. And I hope that people who have stories will talk about them and not talk about them from the point of view of being embarrassed. You don't have to be embarrassed about slavery. You didn't do it. And too many Black people still carry that to this day. That's a heartbreak. When we're still here, that's more than anyone could have ever imagined 200 years ago.
I stay connected to the community in a lot of different ways. I'm the president and CEO of Grant Makers for Girls of Color. We are a premier philanthropic intermediary that resources girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth of color. I'm a co-founder of the Black Girl Freedom Fund and do a lot of work institutionally to try to hold folks in space with girls. And so I hold that same standard for myself. I have lots of opportunity to talk to girls, lots of opportunity to resource movements and organizations that are working directly with girls. And it is my joy and pleasure to be involved in the conversation about how we support girls through literature, but also in actual conversation and relationship, because that's where the magic happens.
So I think one of the things that I do to stay tethered to my community is continue to have circles of sisterhood. When me and my girlfriends got to meet Bell Hooks, who's a native Kentuckian, that was one of the things that she encouraged us to do through Sisters of the Yam. And we are still Sisters of the Yam.
When you're teaching in a university, that is a community. But it's a community that changes all the time because students come, they graduate, they move right along. But fortunately, I've stayed in touch with some of my students. So when Toni Morrison died, I think I heard from 100 students saying, you were the first person I thought about. And or them saying, I've read more of her books now. And I thought, wow, that's the goal. That's what I'm supposed to be doing as a teacher.
Welcome to my debut episode of She Wrote the Book. I'm your new host, Tracy, and today we're going to be diving into the depths of a work that redefines our understanding of our connection in this digital age. There's this book that's been getting outstanding waves, a lot of buzz of anticipation that's going to be released October the 3rd. And this book is called The Loneliness Files, and it is by our guest, Athena Dixon. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Athena. So she is a distinguished poet, essayist, and editor. She hails from Northeast Ohio, but I think she lives in Philly right now. I know she want to give Philly some props too. She is a celebrated author of The Incredible Shrinking Woman, No God in This Room, and her latest, The Loneliness Files, which is set to release via the Tin House. She's also a 3-time Pushcart Prize nominee, a fellow Callaloo and Vona a fellow of Callaloo and Bona, and the brains behind the renowned Linden Avenue Literary Journal. Not just limited to writing, she's also ventured into some podcasting. And if you're lucky, she will actually do some editing for you for a fee, of course. So here we are. Welcome, Athena.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be your first guest.
Yes, because basically, besides all the buzz that you're getting for your book, we are in the same community, one of the same communities. We got all kinds of communities, but one of them is Zora's Den. And I would like to think that I and the community had a hand in writing this book, or just in your writing production. So you can tell me if that's true or not.
That is true. During the first wave of the lockdowns in 2020, when I wrote most of the book, I did a lot of writing sprints with Zora's Den 3 times a week, actually, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So I did write some of this book during those sprints.
Yes, okay. I can't take credit for being there for 3 times a week, but I definitely think those sprints were very helpful. It was a way for us to form community and support one another, and you got a book out of it. So that is pretty awesome. So anyway, I'm going to say that, I had the privilege of reading some of the excerpts from this book, and your exploration of solitude. I used to call solitude solitude because I'm an introvert, so I really enjoy my solitude. But during 2020, when a lot of this book was written, it definitely felt more like solitude. And so I want you to talk about in this really jarring and touching collection of essays. I want to ask you to kind of reflect on the specific challenges and triumphs of this contemporary era that's found in your book, and specifically related to racial injustice. I don't want to say racial justice because most of the time it's racial injustice, and some of the triumphs, and just overall the African American experience. Tie it all together. I know that was a long question, but tie it all together because it's got a lot going on.
So the main part of what I wanted to do in the book, outside of exploring my own loneliness and disconnection, the large part of the essays were written between 2020 and 2022, was I had to take into account the time period that the book was written in. And so at the time, we had started the lockdowns in March of 2020. George Floyd was May of 2020. And then that summer forward was just death and discord and ruin. And then we had the political issues that were going on at the time. And so that period of time, with everyone being isolated, gave us the opportunity to kind of exist in loneliness and disconnection in a different way. And so what was important for me, especially as a Black woman, was to give grace to the quieter times, because at that particular time in history, we were expected to be loud, we were expected to be just fiery, and all that is very necessary and needed, but also there was an element of needing for nuance and for self-care, and for us to be able to explore these kind of quieter emotions, especially in a situation where you're in a global pandemic, you're unsure about the world existing when you walk out because you could be killed at any moment. And then as well, a lot of Black and brown people were considered essential workers. So we really didn't fully get the downtime that everyone else did. And so part of what I wanted to do in that exploration of the loneliness and the isolation was to give people who felt voiceless or invisible an opportunity to sit down and kind of really think about how they had gotten to this point in their lives, not only by their own choices, but the choices that were forced upon them. And I think one of the things that I'm very adamant about in my writing as well, and especially in this book, is that I don't want, especially as a creative nonfiction writer, to have to always write into the trauma, to always write into the violence, to always write into the blood, to give people the option to have a different world to step into. So it was very important for me to do that as a way not only to honor my own story, but also to honor the people who didn't have the opportunity to have these quieter moments of reflection during the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the kind of the overarching themes of this show is tapping into Nina Simone's charge for artists to reflect the times. So could you give me you've kind of answered this already, but can you give me a little bit more about how this reflected the times?
So Nina Simone, absolutely. I was listening to her last week, and I was listening to Baltimore on vinyl. But I think that what she, at least for me, especially loving her as much as I do, represents is this idea that artists, writers, photographers, creatives of any ilk are the bridge between the world experience and the intimate experience. And so I think that my duty as a writer in this book and other books is to be the bridge between the experience that people may not have the opportunity to write. My father likes to say that being a writer is rarefied air, that we have the opportunity to speak for people who will never have the opportunity to have their stories told. And so I take that very, very seriously, of not only putting my own words into the world, but finding experiences, finding people's stories, whether it be my own blood family or people that I've come across in the world, of putting their world and work into the world in a way that it will garner some eyes that they may not have otherwise. But I also think part of that is breaking the echo chambers that exist as well, because just as you want to be a bridge as a writer or another creative to give people voices, you also need to be able to break the echo chamber on the other side of that and use your ability and your skill set to make the people who are in the position of power and influence pay attention to the people who may not have that same voice. And so it's kind of this balancing act between having a foot in both worlds.
Absolutely. And, and when you do that, that actually encourages other people who may have formerly thought themselves as voiceless to want to share their stories, because their story resonates so deeply with what you're telling them and sharing with them, that it kind of gives them the courage to tell their story as well. So we definitely appreciate you using that time that many of us were just watching movies, sitcoms, you know what I mean? So thank you for that. Okay, so what I want to do is also ask you, how do you see storytelling as a tool for both preserving the culture and making a change?
I think, I guess I'll say this. When I teach creative nonfiction, when I talk about writing and editing with students, one of the things I always say is to honor your voice and honor the way the story is supposed to be told. So the way that I use my work to preserve culture is by being very adamant in the writing process, in the editorial process, of saying things the way that I want them to be said. Mm-hmm. Not saying that it has to be all colloquialisms. It doesn't always have to be in AAVE. It doesn't have to always be in perfectly grammatically correct English. How I'm saying the story is how the story is going to get across. I'm a big proponent of rhythm and cadence. I'm a big proponent of things being spelled the way they're spelled in my culture and not the way the dictionary says it should be spelled. I'm a big proponent of not having to explain cultural touchstones in my work, that if we are, especially as Black writers and Black readers, are expected to know things outside of our culture, I expect the same coming the opposite direction. So I honor that by making sure that I'm telling the stories in my native tongue, the way that they're supposed to be told. And then making sure that I'm not highlighting necessarily only the bad or only the good, but telling the totality of the story, the totality of the experience. So when somebody comes back to it later, they can say, this isn't just a sliver of this life. This is a well-rounded vignette of this life.
Absolutely. Toni Morrison tells us that we should write without the white gaze or any gaze on our back for us to be able to find our truth as writers. So have you run into any resistance with other editors as you try to get not just this book, but other works?
I have. I've been told before that my work would be very difficult to shelve because they wouldn't be able to consider it a Black book because of the subject matter that I'm writing about, because it's not writing to certain social and political structures or conversations, that because it's a more general topic, that it would be difficult to shelve. I've had to push back with changing the spellings of things. And like I mentioned before, the spelling of things is very important sometimes. Like it gives you a clue, it gives you a cultural clue, it gives you a regional clue. And so pushing it back against those things, pushing it back about breaking certain kind of grammatical rules as well, because the rhythm of the sentence in this instance is more important than it being correct. So I push back against that stuff all the time as well. And I think too, what happens, especially as a Black writer who writes memoir and personal essay, there was this push a couple of years ago about deeming the personal essay dead, right? And one of my rallying cries over the last couple of years has been, who gets to say that? Who gets to say that the personal essay is dead? Whose stories have already been told? Who is just now getting the opportunity to exist in essay collections or memoirs that aren't famous or athletes? Like, there are stories that need to be told. And so I very much push back against the idea of having to change my work in order to make it more sellable. And I've pushed back against the idea of having to write my work in a way that is more trendy in order to bypass the idea that the personal essay is dead.
Right. And maybe it did have a slow death because of the uniformity of what stories were being told, but it's still very much alive with voices that need to be heard. So basically, we're looking forward to this book, October the 3rd. Where can we continue this journey, the countdown, and just knowing what all the things that you're going to be doing and where you're going to be doing them?
So I have a website, which is athenadixon.com. It has up-to-date media pieces like interviews and reviews. It also has up-to-date publications, and it also has an event calendar, which will have all of my book tour dates on it as well. And I'm most active on Instagram. Okay. That's my safe space. I talk a lot about writing. I do a lot of video diaries and kind of share the ups and downs of being a writer instead of just the highlights of it. So that's the place where you can find me most often.
Okay. Any plans to go on TikTok?
I am on TikTok. I have like 4 videos, but mainly my TikTok is for me to get book recommendations. I'm really heavy into Black book talk, just so I can get book recommendations.
Okay. I'll move over there and see if I can find you as this story of your book comes to life. So thank you so much for joining us. You're very, very insightful. And I hope that you'll be tuning in to She Wrote the Book more often, because you were the first guest. You made history. The first guest, my first guest. So you made history in that respect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And next up is 10 Authors Books Galore, where we are going to pay tribute and celebrate 10 authors from our Primetime 55 Plus community. But before this closing tribute, I would like to thank our wonderful guests. I would like to thank the team that helped put this show together. And I would like to thank you, the audience. And just remember, if someone asks you who wrote the book, she wrote the book.